We start a new series today called Cultivate. If you will, turn in your Bibles with me to the book. It's not a pen, don't turn there. We are turning to the book of Haggai. If you'll turn to page 660 in the Bible in your pew, if that's the Bible you're using. If you do not have a Bible, please take this Bible as our gift to you, free of charge. Put your name in it, take it home, call it yours. We invite you to have the Word of God in your hands, to read, not collect dust. So culture can actually be a very hard thing to define. What is culture? How do we define what a culture is, or what makes a culture what it is? It doesn't take you very long to learn that there are multiple kinds of culture. There's culture just within family units. There's cultures within neighborhoods. There's cultures within counties. There's cultures within cities. There's cultures within states, countries. So many different subcultures, if you will. But if we were going to define it in its simplest form, sociologists would articulate it this way. They would say that it's the narratives or the stories that we tell. It's the convictions, the things that we hold onto that convict us to say, this is how we are going to live in our culture, in our world. But it's also the practices. It's the things that we do, the things that make us who we are, that kind of set us apart from other cultures. You see, culture has to be cultivated. Culture just doesn't happen. At least the culture that we want to happen. You see, we have to be intentional about it. If we're not intentional about the culture that we create, then we create whatever we want, right? If we don't say this is what we want our culture to be known as or to be defined by, then it's anybody's game. Every single one of us could create our own culture if we wanted. But would that really be a very good idea? If you're shaking your head no, look around. That's what's literally happened. We've created this individualistic society that says you can do whatever you want because you are your own person. You get to create your culture. But is that what's best for the culture? You see, I believe that we have to be intentional about how we shape and mold our culture. But the hardest thing about culture is to try and change it. Have you ever tried to change a culture? Maybe it was a decision that you made in your work that you had to make that you knew was going to create some tension because it's not the way you've always done it. And you kind of have to shape a new culture in a culture that's already established, and it becomes difficult. So you have to start by cultivating that culture. You have to start by being intentional about everything that you do. I'm not a farmer by any means. But when I think about cultivating something, I immediately go to farming. And I think about all the things that have to go into having a crop. You see, when I was younger, I was that naive kid that thought farmers only worked part of the year. See, yeah, that's how it works. It is true. They get paid good for doing it too. That is working only one day a week. But when we think about cultivating crops, preparing, the work that goes into the harvest. You see, we like to microwave our harvest, right? We like to throw it in the microwave and ding, it's done in a minute and we're good to go. But there's so much that goes into the cultivation. First, you have to test your soil. What is the quality of the soil that you have? Then determining what kind of soil that you have. As I've learned, there's at least 3 different types of soil. And they all differ in how you have to go about preparing the land to put the seed in the ground. But once you've determined those things, then you've got to determine what kind of seed would work best in the kind of ground that you have to work with. You may need to adjust the pH, or you may need to add some organic matter, or you may need to adjust or add the nutrients into the soil. You have to decide whether you're going to do some tilling or you're going to do a no-till. It's like, why does there got to be always an option? It's like, I believe that some farmer got lazy and said, there's got to be a better way to do this. This is too much work. That's a side note. I'm probably totally wrong. Don't worry. I'm wrong a lot. Ask Jennifer. But there's also the planting. It's the preparation of putting the seed in the ground. But then there's the water management and the nutrient management. All of these things that go into caring for the land and the crops before you get the harvest. It's a process that goes into it. Then once you have the harvest, you've got to begin preparing the ground for the next year. And there's also those things called machines that like to break down, and they need to be worked on and prepared to be able to be used for the next thing. All of these things that go into the simple process of cultivating. Cultivating. In John 15, 8-7, we see that Jesus tells us that we need to bear fruit in keeping with what it means to be a disciple. We need to bear fruit. But in Galatians chapter 5, starting in verse 14, we see that Paul tells us that there are fruits of the Spirit. That there are different things that set us apart from being part of Christ and being part of the world. There are different things. And we have to decide, what things are we going to cultivate? What things are we going to build into our culture? So we all know that the best apples are the Honeycrisp apples. And I've just discovered the Fuji apple. Crisp apples. Not that mushy, soft stuff that, I don't want to eat applesauce, I want a crisp apple. We all know that these are God's fruit of kind of apple. And we look at this and we say, duh, that came from an apple tree. But the same should be true about followers of Christ? When people see our lives and how we live, do they look at us and say, they come from the tree of Christ? That Jesus is who they live their life for? Do they see it in us? When we go to the store and we buy a bag of apples, the good kind, the Honeycrisp and the Fuji apples, cost about $7 a bag now. I remember when I just went and picked them off the trees of my neighbors. But now I've got to pay $7 a bag. But when they're good, I'm willing to pay $7 for the good stuff. You know, the ones that don't have bees crawling through them and the holes bored through them. It's the good, shiny apples. You see, when I go to the store, I've placed a value on that apple. And you see, as followers of Christ, we also place a value on our faith. What value do you place on your faith? Because the value that you place on your faith will determine what kind of faith you want to cultivate. So in this series, we're going to look at how we can cultivate the things of spiritual journey that we're on. How can we cultivate a life that seeks to live more in tune with Christ? But we're also going to look at how can we, as a Jesus community or a congregation or a church, we're all the church, not just this place, but how can we cultivate within our culture these certain principles? So our missional mandate, if you will, is to connect people to Jesus by reviving faith, restoring hope, and revealing love in the community. So we're saying that's the kind of culture we want to be. We want to revive faith in people. We want to restore hope. And we want to reveal love. So this week we're going to look at the first one. We're going to look at reviving faith. What does it look like to be a culture of faith? But also, what does it look like to cultivate our own faith? So we turn to probably a book you've not heard of. You've probably skimmed past it and said, oh, that's a lot of short books. You've probably read this book because it was short. Okay, let's be honest here. How many of you have gone through the Bible and picked out all the short books and read those first? Seriously? 3 guys. I'll admit it, I did it. Sorry, I move on. That was just something that came to me. So looking at the book of Haggai. So you need a little bit of context to understand this book. The Babylonians had conquered Jerusalem. And they had destroyed the temple. They had destroyed the city walls. Everything was left in ruins. God's holy city was decimated by the Babylonians. The Babylonian people took the Jews into exile and they took them back to Babylon to live. In 538 BC, Cyrus, the king of Persia, conquered the Babylonian Empire. And Cyrus the king made a decree that the Jews could be released and they could go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. If you want to see or read more of what's going on to understand Haggai, look at the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Those tell the story of the Jews going back to Jerusalem to rebuild the city walls, to protect Jerusalem, and to rebuild the temple and the holy city of God. So 50,000 Jews returned from exile to Jerusalem to begin the process of rebuilding the temple. Haggai is a prophet. He's sent by God to the Jews to encourage the Hebrew people to rebuild the temple, to build the temple that they were sent to build. So looking in the book of Haggai, starting in verse 1, it says, "In the second year of King Darius, on the first day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, son of Jehoiada, that's totally wrong, the high priest. This is what the Lord Almighty says. The people say, the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses, while this house remains in ruin?" So let's stop right there. So how do we cultivate a culture of faith? The first thing I see here is to not neglect the things of God. If you want to cultivate your faith, don't neglect the things of God. You see, they had come back to Jerusalem. They started the temple. But then they started building their homes. And they started building the palaces. And they started rebuilding the city. But yet, the reason they went back was to rebuild the temple. But they left it. And they took care of everything else. And God is saying through Haggai right here that, why is it right for you to live in your paneled houses or to live in the walls of your home, yet you've neglected me? In the times of the Old Testament, we didn't have Jesus among us as one of us. And at that time, the Holy Spirit wasn't necessarily living inside each person. So the temple was the place where they had to go to experience or be in the presence of God. But yet it remained unbuilt. So the very thing that would connect them with God, they neglected. What are the things in your life that are of God that you're neglecting? That you're putting something in your own life that you see as more important than God's purpose? Number 2, reflect on your current situation. Reflect on your current situation. Verse 5 says, "Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You have planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages, only to put them in a purse with holes in it." God's telling him, you need to take a minute and look at the situation. You set out to do these things, but they're never fulfilled. The crop that you plant, you never harvest the full amount. The food that you eat, you're never satisfied. At what point do we stop and ask ourselves, what am I doing or not doing that could be responsible for my result? You see, we're typical human beings and we like to say, that's my problem, or that person is my problem. But we don't look at ourselves and say, how could I be contributing to my problem? So he's calling the Jews to look at themselves. Why aren't you fulfilled when you eat your food? Why is it that when you put money and you work hard to earn your money, that when you put it in your purse or your pockets, for us guys, we don't carry the purse thing, why is it that it just falls right through? Why is it that it seems like we put it in, but when we go to get it, it's never there because it's already gone? Why is that? So he goes on. Verse 7. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. If God says something twice, that close together, you better pay attention to it. Give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build my house so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why, declares the Lord? Why am I in this certain situation? Why am I getting the result? And how could I possibly be contributing to the problem? Because of my house, which remains in a ruin, while each of you is busy with your own house. Therefore, because of everyone else in your life causing you problems, you have the result that you have. Because your boss does not know how to lead, you have all of these problems. Because the bank messed up your bank account, you cannot find your money. I'm sorry, that's not in there. It says, therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew and the earth its crops. I called for a drought on the fields and the mountains, on the grain, the new wine, the olive oil, everything else the ground produces, on people and livestock, and all the labor of your hands. Where's your faith? Why aren't you doing the things that are important? You see, he was telling them the result of you valuing me first is what you get because you have not valued me. How much of our lives are the result of our faith in God? How much of our finances are in ruin because we haven't trusted God with our tithe and our offering? Because we have felt like we need it all. God, help me. And God says, I would like to help you. But I can't because you won't put your faith in me. Trust me. Put your faith in me. And you see a different result. The relationships that you're struggling with, the person that you're arguing with, have you stopped and prayed for that person? Or have you only see them as the person who opposes you, but failed to see them as a person? Our results are determined by our faith in God. Number 3, be obedient to God. Be obedient to God. It says, then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, Joseph, the son of Zadok, the high priest, and the whole remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the message of the prophet Haggai, because the Lord their God had sent him, and the people feared the Lord. Verse 13, then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave this message of the Lord to the people. I am with you. They obeyed God's command. Stop focusing on yourself and focus on me. Make me the priority. Be obedient to what I'm asking you. And out of that obedience, we see that it prompted God's encouragement, because see, God knows us. He knows that we can't do it on our own, because we'll get overwhelmed by the picture. Could you imagine being the Jews sitting there looking at this thing saying, how are we going to build this temple? How are we going to do this? It's going to take us forever to build this temple. And you get overwhelmed with the vastness of what's in front of you. And you say, I can't do it. So he encourages us. And for what the Israelites needed to hear was, I am with you. I'm not going to give you a command and ask you to obey me and then leave you. I'm going to stay with you in the midst of it. It doesn't mean that their troubles were going to go away immediately just because they obeyed. God knew that they were going to have even more trouble because they were obeying. But if they would obey, things would be better for them in the end. How do we grow our faith? It starts with obedience. If your faith is not where you want it to be, ask yourself, where am I not obeying God in my life? Where are we not obeying God? Hebrews 11, verse 1 says, faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. Confidence in what we hope for. We hope to build a temple. We hope to be reunited as Jerusalem, God's holy city, God's holy people. We hope for that. But we cannot see it. It's too far away. We can't see it. But if we just have faith, not in our abilities, but in God's ability, who can see the whole picture, we cultivate our faith. Number 4, how do we cultivate our faith? Don't give up when it gets hard. Don't give up when it gets hard. Chapter 2, verse 3 says, ask them, who of you is left who saw this house in its former glory? He's reminding them of the previous temple that Solomon had built. How does it look to you now? Does it not seem to you like nothing? But now be strong, Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Be strong, Joseph, son of Zadok, the high priest. Be strong, all you people of the land, declares the Lord, and work, for I am with you, declares the Lord. This is what I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit remains among you. Do not fear. Well, to understand what's going on here, you need a little bit of more of the story that Ezra and Nehemiah tell us in their books. Well, you see, the Samaritans and some of the other neighboring people groups were scared that the Jews had returned to Jerusalem, and they feared the religious power of the Jews rebuilding the temple. And so they began to fight as hard as they could to stop the rebuilding of the temple. So the Jews returned to Jerusalem in 538 BC. In 536 BC, so 2 years after returning, they had completed the foundation of the temple. That's all they had done. And then they started getting all the attention of the Samaritans and these neighboring people groups. And they began to oppose the project. And they were able to fight off the rebuilding of the temple until 520 BC. If you're doing the math, 326, 520. I went backwards. It's 80. Sorry. Yeah. I'll get it right eventually. Hundreds of years before this temple was finally started. You see, as soon as they started getting friction, as soon as it started getting hard, okay, you don't want us to build a temple? I'm not building a temple. I'm not going to give my life for that. But then they probably got a little angry. I planted 2 fields of crops. Why do I not have 2 fields of crops in my bins at harvest time? Why are my kids going hungry? Why do I have no money to pay my bills? The debt collectors are knocking on my door because I can't pay them. Why is it that the clothes that I made 2 weeks ago have worn out already? Why? Because they failed to put God first. They failed to prioritize God in their life. They said, we can do it. We can do it on our own. But obedience, when things get hard, brings God's encouragement, but also the strength of His Spirit to help us. Remembering that we're never alone. That God is with us when things are hard. Number 5. Trust God with what is already His. Trust God with what is already His. Verse 8. He says, the silver is mine, and the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty. The glory of this present house will be greater than the glory of the former house, says the Lord Almighty. And in this place I will grant peace, declares the Lord. He's telling us, these things are mine. And I'm showing you the end result of your faith. Wouldn't you love that? When God tells you to be obedient to something, or when you feel God convicting you to do something, that you knew the end result. that if I do this, this is what's going to happen. I don't think you would like it. I don't think we want to know that. I think we're blessed by not knowing that. How many of you can think of circumstances in your life where you said, if I knew the end result, I would have never done it in the first place? You don't want to go through all that. My life's messy enough. I don't want to do that and end up in a bigger mess. Why do I have to go through this mess and this pain? Why can't I just be happy? Because you will be greater than the previous self, having gone through it. You see, the first temple was all of its splendor. It was the most beautiful thing that Solomon had ever built. And it was destroyed. Rubble, ruin. And God says, it will be greater than that one. But yet, that temple had to be destroyed before its greater version could be built. You see, the same is true with us. When we go through the battles and the trials and the tribulations of life, they make us better than we were before we went through them. They make us stronger than we were before we went through them. But they also build our faith stronger than when we went through it. But I love the line he says at the very end where he says, and I will grant peace. If you want happiness, you want ultimate happiness, you want God's peace. Have you ever just had those moments, not the stress moments, but the moments where you can just say, life is good. That moment of what they call shalom in the Jewish culture. It's a peace that you can only get from God. It's the overwhelming peace of saying, if I die right now, I can die a happy man. That only happens when you've lived life with faith. Living life of knowing God is in control. I need to be a good steward of what he gives me. But I need to know that God is in control. The faith of the Jews prompted God's promises. He promised them things. You will be greater than you were before. You will finally have peace. Could you imagine being exiled for hundreds of years? Your children's 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 children grew up in fear of what might happen to them because they were outsiders in a culture that was not their own. And now all of a sudden God is saying, you will have peace. That's what they lived for, was to not have to worry about life. But it was cultivated through a process of putting their faith in God. Faith does not get cultivated by saying, God, I trust you. You're going to be standing there looking for a while. Because here's what I've learned. Faith requires action. Never forget that. Faith requires action. In order to grow your faith, you have to do something. Sitting on your butt saying, God will provide everything I need because I believe. will get you nothing. If you think that God is going to bring the man of your dreams to your doorstep because you trust that he will bring the right person into your life, you're either going to marry the Jehovah's Witness or the FedEx guy. Because those are your options. Faith requires you to go through the mess of life. Because believe it or not, that's what makes you who you are. Quick story. We finished up our cross-country season this year. Sad moment for me because I want to coach. I want to run, right? A week before the end of the season, one of my teammates lost their house in a house fire. Happens to be also a sister of the girl who runs for us, is good friends, best friends with Samantha. And so I don't know if you know this, but I had 3 house fires growing up. Started my life over 3 times. I understand the pain. So the first practice, she came back and I came up to her and I said, "So how are you doing?" "I'm fine." But my experience led me to say, "Come over here. So tell me how you're really doing." She's like, "It's sad." I'm like, "It is." And I tell her, I'm sorry that you have to go through this. It's not fun for anyone. Know that if there's anything that I can do for you or your family, I will try my best to help in any way I can. Because of my pain, I was able to comfort a 12-year-old girl whose life has been turned upside down. And she trusts me enough to know that I'll help any way I can. My pain can make her stronger. And then guess what? That gives me another opportunity down the road as this relationship grows with this runner. Hopefully I get the opportunity to share faith with her that I wouldn't have had if she would have just been a runner on my team. You see, I believe for me, I don't coach just to coach runners. I love to run, but that's not the reason I coach. I've got tons of stuff that I need to do. I sacrifice things that I need to get done to spend time with these kids as runners. But the reason I do it is so that I can influence their lives. Because some of the most important people in my life that spoke into my life the most were coaches. I see it as a platform to be able to influence young people to live powerful lives. That's why I coach. But it was the pain that taught me those lessons, that brought me to this place, to make me who I am, to be a servant of God. But it's also because I put my faith in God. I realize possessions are meaningless. Read Ecclesiastes sometime. They can be meaningless. What value do they have when they could be gone tomorrow? Am I going to stop living my life because all of the things that I possessed are now gone? No. Because God puts people in our lives that says, "I will provide." Samantha's friend, we asked Samantha, what can we do for Mackenzie? And Samantha and Mackenzie love Thai, like, bean thingies. It's like stuffed animal little dudes with big beady eyes. And Mackenzie loves pigs. Not sure why, but she likes pigs. I like bacon, she likes pigs, but... So Samantha says, we can get her a Thai beanie baby. I'm like, great. So tomorrow she's going to school to give her friend a Thai beanie baby. Well, Samantha sees this as an opportunity to care for her friend. And this is no just ordinary friend. If you know Samantha, she's very shy. She doesn't talk all that much. She's kind of to herself. The fact that she has a friend is like, yes. And, accomplishment. This is the type of friend that this girl is to Samantha. A kid tripped Samantha on the playground. She fell and actually hit a pole and hit the side of her head. Samantha goes into the school. Mackenzie goes up to the boy, hauls off, and slugs him. So I no longer worry about somebody taking care of Samantha. But we see this friendship developing. Mackenzie's family doesn't go to church. Mackenzie doesn't go to church. Mackenzie doesn't know who Jesus Christ is. But guess what? There's a little girl named Samantha who does know who Jesus Christ is. And she's going to go to school tomorrow with a little pig. And she's going to show Jesus to Mackenzie. Pain. Healing. That's how it works. Are we willing to put our faith in God? Because that's how we sow the life that he has for us. It's how we reap the harvest of living life to the fullest, because we cultivated faith. I've gone long. I apologize. No, I don't. I don't care. We're not going to sing the last song. Let's stand together. Receive this blessing as we go. If you will, stretch out your hands. God of heaven and earth, I pray faith over us today. God, I pray that you will help us see our current reality. That we will look within ourselves to see who we are in this moment and say, God, where am I hindering my relationship with you? Where am I holding you back because I'm not putting you first? God, help us to step out in faith and trust you in what we do not see. God, help us to not just simply leave this place who we are right this moment. Help us leave this place trusting in your promises that you will make us stronger, wiser, healthier people, because we are willing to put our faith in you. May we go to live our life to honor you with all of our being this week. And may people look at us and say, we come from the tree of Jesus. Amen.